Everybody, I'm Brian Julius. I'm the Chief Content Officer for Enterprise DNA, and we've got a double header going today. This is our big SQL month of April, and we've got Hafiz, Zubair, and Antriksh Sharma here today, both of whom are going to be rolling out SQL courses from different perspectives this month. And so I'm excited to have both of you guys here today, and we can talk about the courses and talk about the importance of SQL in data analysis. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much, Brian.
Yep. Thanks, Brian, for having us here and giving this opportunity to create another course. And I'm really glad that I'm creating this course that has not been done before. And I'm Antriksh Sharma. I'm a business analyst with experience in Excel, Power BI, Python, and now SQL as well. And this time we are creating a course on SQL for DAX users. Hafiz is going to create one for the SQL for Power BI users, and I'm going to create one so that it is easier for the people who know SQL to transition from SQL and apply their knowledge of SQL into DAX, because in some ways both are the same, but we are going to talk about that in a moment. And off to you, Hafiz.
Yep. Thank you very much, Antriksh. My name is Hafiz. I have been writing SQL for a number of years. I learned Power BI in last 3 years, and I think transitioning from Power BI to SQL is very easy, because if you know Power BI, getting SQL is very easy. Understanding SQL is very easy because you will be using same joins and unions and aggregate functions. So I think it will be very simple for you to understand SQL once you understand a little bit about Power BI.
I think you guys both raised a really great point, is that there are a lot of good SQL courses out there, but the thing that makes, I think, what we're offering unique is that it takes into account what folks already know from Power BI. And so you can start from a higher baseline than if you're just assuming people are coming in cold from scratch. That is, as Antriksh said, that there's carryover in learning SQL if you know DAX, and Hafiz and I have talked about there's carryover in DAX if you know SQL. And so before we get into the details, wanted to get each of your perspectives on why you think learning SQL is important for data analysts, because we typically talk in Enterprise DNA about kind of the full stack for data analysts being, some solid Excel knowledge, SQL, Power BI, and then the choice of either R or Python. And so wanted to get your perspectives on why you think SQL is an important part of that stack.
Yeah, I think if you understand SQL, then you can do all the manipulation in SQL, and that will be quite fast. And it will be less time consuming for you to transform that and clean the data in SQL. Your reports will be faster. And most other important element will be you will be able to implement advanced features like aggregation or incremental refresh. If you do not know SQL, it will be complex for you. And last but not the least, it is data validation. Because if you know SQL and you are getting data from SQL Server or any other database, you can connect to that database and you can extract data and see how the data looks. Let's say if you have created a report and your report is not showing the right numbers, it is of no use. And once you create the report, you can always go back to SQL and then run the command very quickly. Within 5 minutes, you can analyze your data and you can validate that your numbers are right. So your DAX is right and your SQL is confirming that your data is right and your numbers are right. So it is a very, very big advantage of learning SQL with Power BI.
Yeah, those are great points. And, particularly for, complex measures. I know sometimes people will, do analyze in Excel to try to validate their data. But from the standpoint of, really complex measures and complex reports, I think, validating through SQL is a much better approach.
Yep. And it is less time consuming as well.
Right. Absolutely. And I think Hafiz has made all very great points. And one of the reasons I think you should learn SQL is that because everyone is doing so on LinkedIn, because every post out there says you should learn you should learn SQL. Just kidding. But I think you should learn SQL because it allows you to talk to the primary container of your data, because your data, if you're going to work in a corporate environment, then it is not always going to be the case that you're going to work with just CSV files or Excel files, because there needs to be a centralized location where your data is hosted so that other developers can also use that data source. Otherwise, if you have an Excel file, then only you are going to be the owner of that. And maintaining the integrity of the data is not going to be possible. So there will be multiple copies of that Excel file. So you can think of like a data flow in Power BI service. That's just like centralizing your data inside a data warehouse or a database. And I think, and even if you do not start with SQL just because of learning SQL, if you're learning Power BI, there are a lot of features that require some attention to detail on SQL language, because let's say your database is in billions of rows, then in that case, there is a possibility that you're going to use direct query. And in case if you're applying complex transformations, then also you need to make sure that the transformations are getting sent back to the data source. So in case if you're able to think in terms of SQL, you will be able to optimize your code in case of direct query so that your reports can run faster, because you need to know about indexes. You need to know about what are the bottlenecks that are preventing your reports from running in a fast way. And in case if we talk about native query, then if it breaks, then you need to understand if you can actually do that transformation in the data source itself, because when you click on close and apply, analysis services has to perform some steps. So it has to load the data from the data source. And in case if there are some complex transformations in Power Query, then what Power Query will basically do, it will load the data onto the RAM, and then it will try to process the data. So that will be a lot of pressure on the CPU and the Power Query. And instead of doing that, you can actually do all those transformation in the database itself, so that you can only retrieve the data and Power Query only acts as a pass-through. And once you click on the close and apply, analysis services has to sort the data in the most optimal manner. And in case if there are bottlenecks in the Power Query, then you will experience load time. You will have to wait for a couple of minutes so that the data can be loaded. So you can actually avoid that bottleneck by learning SQL and try to optimize the columns that you're creating on your data. So I think, and these are some of the reasons. And one of the most important reason would be to create a perfect data model, star schema, or maybe a snowflake schema in case if that is required. So ideally you should do that in the database itself.
That really fits with, what we've talked about Roche's maxim about pushing everything as far upstream as possible. And so, the knowledge you get on SQL gives you that opportunity to push further upstream, and for all the reasons you talked about, that being beneficial. I just want to, before we get into the course specifics, wanted to just hear from each of you kind of about some of the practical ways in which you use SQL in your daily work.
So you can do query folding. You can connect to database. If you have clean data, you can take advantage of query folding. And in case of query folding, you do not need a SQL knowledge. But if you want a clean data model, most of the time you do not need all the rows. You need only filtered rows, and sometimes you need only aggregated data. So in those cases, you do not need to bring in the entire fact table. You just need to bring that aggregated data, and you can do that very easily with SQL. So with the benefit of SQL is that you can analyze the numbers before even bringing those to Power BI. So you can think of your schema before even bringing the data in your Power BI. So in my day-to-day life, what I do, I first connect to database. I analyze the number there, and once I'm happy with the number over here, only then I bring in Power BI. And then you don't need to write very complex DAX once you create a very beautiful and clean model.
Yep, completely agree with Hafiz, and Hafiz has completely included all the points that a data analyst performs. So I also do all those same operations. And I think in case if you can do the transformation in SQL, then you can avoid the time spent in Power Query or DAX. But that is not to say that DAX is always bad. Sometimes you have to evaluate that in case if loading the data from SQL Server is or any other database is causing a lot of delay, then you can maybe create that column inside DAX, because that column is going to be computed towards the end. And by that time, the data will be loaded in the data model. So maybe you can optimize the whole workflow by just creating a column in DAX. But I think still evaluating that whether it should be done in SQL or not is the best step.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, both of your points about the extent to which this can simplify your DAX, I've found to be absolutely true. That, when I first started with Power BI, it was all kind of DAX. And I found myself writing a lot of complex DAX. And I used to think that was kind of the mark of a good Power BI report, was if you had a lot of complex DAX.
Right.
And now I've completely turned around that I think the best reports are the ones with the simplest DAX. And that if you put that upfront analysis in that Hafiz was talking about, and you build a really strong star schema data model, it's amazing to me how simple your DAX is in most cases. And, I think that makes it far easier to transition the model to somebody else. Because it's very likely in the core life cycle of a report that you're not going to be responsible for that report through its whole life. And so somebody else is going to be taking that over. And to the extent that you can make that as simple as possible and not have, hundreds or thousands of lines of DAX and folders full of measures, I think that's very much to the benefit. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is kind of, what do you think the average data analyst, what's the level of SQL expertise you think that that somebody needs to achieve to be an effective analyst?
So I would say that they should have intermediate level of expertise. This course will take you from basic to intermediate. And I think if you have intermediate level of knowledge in SQL, you can perform a lot better and you will be more productive as compared to if you do not have basic knowledge of SQL. So in case of if you understand SQL, your productivity will be very high as compared to at the time when you do not know SQL. So you will be limited. You will be limiting yourself if you are not learning SQL.
I think as far as I know, all the data analysts and my friend, I think they only know about the queuing part of the SQL. And that is, I think, almost all that they need to know about the SQL from their job perspective, because they do not need to do insert or update operations. They just need to query the data and maybe just know about the views in SQL, because they act as a logical separation between your tables and the data that you're loading inside Power BI. So if I have to recommend someone to learn SQL, I would say that learn those 5-6 statements that are select, where, group by, joins, and also learn about views. From the querying part, that's all that you need to know. And then later they can use websites such as Lead Code to practice SQL, so that they can understand how they can manipulate the data by using different SQL functions. So there is not a lot of things that a person needs to learn in SQL.
Mm-hmm. And those are all the fundamental building blocks that Hafiz's course covers. So Antriksh, I want to talk to you about your course. Your course is kind of unique in the sense that, in Hafiz's course, it's basically assuming Power BI and DAX, and you're learning SQL. For yours, we're flipping it around. We're saying, okay, let's say somebody who's got some strong knowledge about SQL is coming to Power BI. And so talk about the perspective you're taking in your course.
So the course is about DAX for SQL developers. So a lot of people who know SQL, they don't actually realize that the queries that are generated by Power BI behind the scene are actually extracting the data by sending a request in form of an XM SQL language. So if you use DAX Studio and you connect to your analysis services model, you will notice that the requests that are sent to the storage engine, which is one of the engine that actually hosts the data inside Vertipack or in direct query, which it acts as a pass-through. Then in that case, let's say you write a basic query such as, maybe let's say you drag a column from a table into a matrix. Behind the scene, Power BI is going to generate a request to the storage engine so that it can retrieve the data. Now that request that is sent to the storage engine will look something like select products, let's say products column from the products table. So if you are able to understand that, then you can actually transfer your knowledge of SQL better into DAX so that you can write more optimized code. And this will also lead you to the other course that we have created in January, which was about DAX optimization, where we have talked about XM SQL in much more detail. But in this course, I'm going to take the person through very basic of how to match their knowledge of SQL with the DAX. So from select to, let's say, where to having, and how the data is stored in SQL Server or any other database versus how the data is stored inside Vertipack, and what are the queries or the limitations that are there when you use the direct query mode. So all of that is going to be covered in this course.
Great. And so from a time perspective, Hafiz's course is the one we're going to roll out first this month, and that'll be at the end of this week. So by April 8th, we'll have that one out on the platform, and then yours, Antriksh, we're going to roll out by the end of the month. So if folks are watching this, we figured it would be good to have the discussion with the three of us, given the relationship between the two courses. But for folks who are watching this, and you're wondering, okay, where are both courses? Hafiz is coming out first, Antriksh by the end of the month. So plenty for you to learn and study this month. One of the questions we get, and I think one of the confusions about SQL, is there's a lot of different flavors of SQL, and I think there's a lot of confusion about how those all nest and fit together. And wanted to get you guys to explain to the folks watching this kind of what that hierarchy is, and kind of how you've made choices in your courses about which flavor to use and why.
Okay, so SQL is basically standard, ANSI standard. So the standard SQL will remain same whether you choose MySQL, PL SQL, or T-SQL. So T-SQL is transact SQL that is used in SQL Server, and PL SQL is used in Oracle, and MySQL is in MySQL. But these are different flavors. The underlying structure is same. All the things are same. Only the built-in functions are different. For example, maybe you can say date diff might be syntax might be different in date diff command, but the rest of the things like select or having or group by or this sort of common table expression, subquery, whatever you will learn in the course will remain almost the same. So I would say that if you know SQL, if you have practice or know SQL in one platform, you can very easily transfer your skills to other. It will not take like time at all. Because you will be knowing around 99% of the time. You already know what needs to be done.
Right. So I think if you know how to be a manager in one company, you will actually automatically know how to be a manager in another company. It's just that the people will be different, but you know what you need to do. So SQL is just like that. So there is a governing body which maintains the SQL, and all of the vendors need to at least use that flavor of SQL, and then later they can add more functionalities, more features, so that they can stand out from the competitor. But apart from that, if you learn any SQL, it doesn't matter as long as it is the relational database management related SQL, not the one that is for the NoSQL. You will be able to transfer your knowledge from, let's say, SQL Server to MySQL to Oracle. So if you learn T-SQL, you can go ahead and use the same language in any other one. And to answer your question, I actually prefer T-SQL because it is from Microsoft. So I like to stay in the environment of Microsoft only. And because in the SQL Server Management Studio, I can actually use analysis services as well. So I do not have to manage any other database and then use analysis services. So everything is closely integrated with each other. So that's why I like to stick with Microsoft products.
Yeah. And that is why I also created my course in T-SQL. So people who are, most of the organizations implement T-SQL when they are implementing Power BI. Right. So that is why working on T-SQL, working on the platform where you need to work in any company, that will be beneficial. So that is why I have chosen T-SQL.
Great. Well, that definitely, I think, will help clarify some of the questions we've been getting. And the last question I had is just kind of individual in terms of, for folks who are going to be taking your courses, do you have any recommendations and suggestions for kind of the best way to work through those?
Yeah, I would say that in the first lecture, I will be installing SQL Server, and then I will be installing databases, practice databases. So I would recommend people to not only watch the videos, but practice SQL right from the first lecture. So from the third lecture, I will be starting writing T-SQL code, and these guys should not write the commands that I am writing, because I have already provided the material. So they will be able to review the lectures after listening to the lecture. So they should practice after listening. So it is around 3.5 hours course, but if they practice, it will be around 7 hours course. So within 7 to 8 hours, they will be very proficient in SQL, but they should be actively working on SQL Server.
And so kind of chapter by chapter, you think kind of watch, practice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think for my course, maybe the users will have to go back to the course that we have already released on DAX Studio and optimization, because I'm not going to teach how to use DAX Studio. Otherwise, it will be really long course. So maybe from time to time, I will ask the user to jump back and forth so that they're able to understand what is actually DAX Studio and able to follow along. So I think once the person understands how to use DAX Studio and SQL, once they consume Hafiz's course, I think they will be able to cover up my course in 1 week easily, because I will try to make it really easy so that even a non-technical person can easily understand what we are trying to convey here.
That's great. And I think the fact that you guys have both compressed those courses, taken advantage of the knowledge people are already going to be coming with, I think makes this a really efficient, study path. And so just wanted to thank both of you. I know you've both put a lot of time and effort and thought into these courses. We're really excited to roll this out. I think it's an important component that we've been missing to date. And so I think this fills a really critical gap for us. I know there's a lot of interest among our users. So just again, really want to thank you guys for being here today and for all the hard work and putting these courses together.
Thank you very much, Brian, for providing us this opportunity.
Absolutely. Yeah, that too.
All right. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Cheers.
You too. Bye.
Bye-bye.